For the first 30 seconds, imagine discovering that everything you thought you knew about Superman was only the surface of a much darker truth. A story where hope slowly twists into fear, where the symbol meant to inspire the world becomes the very thing that keeps it awake at night, and where every punch, every rescue, and every smile hides a terrifying question that no one ever dared to ask. What happens when the most powerful being on Earth realizes he no longer needs to be gentle, no longer needs to pretend, and no longer needs humanity's approval? Because by the end of this video you will understand how Superman's greatest strength also becomes the darkest shadow the DC Universe has ever known, and why this story changes the way you will see the Man of Steel forever. This story begins not with destruction, but with restraint. Because Superman's entire existence has always been defined by what he chooses not to do, by the oceans he does not boil, by the cities he does not level, by the villains he does not erase from existence in a single second. And that constant self-control slowly becomes the most unnatural thing about him, because every day he lives among fragile beings who break bones from falling downstairs while he could shatter continents by accident. And over time, that gap between godlike power and human limitation stops feeling noble and starts feeling isolating, almost cruel, as if the universe itself made a mistake by placing something so powerful in a world so breakable. As the years pass in this dark timeline, Superman saves the planet again and again, stopping invasions, reversing catastrophes, and preventing extinctions that humanity never even realizes were seconds away from happening. Yet, instead of gratitude, he begins to notice something colder growing in the eyes of the people he protects, because admiration slowly mutates into fear, and hope quietly turns into dependence. And the world starts asking not whether Superman will save them, but why he hasn't already fixed everything, why hunger still exists, why wars still happen, and why a god among men allows suffering to continue at all. That question eats at him, because it reveals the truth Superman never wanted to face. The idea that by holding back he may not be protecting humanity, but limiting it, trapping it in a permanent childhood where mistakes are allowed only because a cosmic parent stands ready to clean them up. And suddenly his restraint feels less like morality and more like manipulation, as if he has been deciding the fate of the world by choosing which problems deserve his attention and which must be endured by ordinary people. And in that realization, something subtle but irreversible begins to crack. The darkness of this story truly reveals itself when Superman stops asking what he can do and starts asking what he should do. Because that question has no clear answer when you are strong enough to enforce any outcome you believe is right, and once that line is crossed, every decision becomes terrifying, since saving everyone now requires defining what everyone deserves to be saved from, including themselves. And the moment Superman intervenes in one conflict perfectly, ending it forever instead of temporarily, the world realizes that the Man of Steel is no longer just a hero, but a final solution. What makes this story darker than you ever imagined is not the destruction, but the efficiency. Because Superman does not rage or scream or laugh maniacally, he simply acts, removing threats before they escalate, dismantling criminal empires overnight, disarming nations without firing a single shot, and rewriting the balance of power so completely that resistance becomes pointless. And while the streets grow quieter and the skies clearer, something vital disappears alongside the chaos. The messy, dangerous, unpredictable freedom that defined humanity in the first place. The Justice League, once his equals and friends, become witnesses to a being who has outgrown the need for consensus. Because Superman no longer argues strategy or ethics, he presents outcomes. And even when those outcomes are peaceful and bloodless, the silence they create feels wrong. Because peace enforced by inevitability is not the same as peace chosen through struggle, and every hero knows it, even if none of them are strong enough to stop it. In this timeline, the world does not end in fire or explosions, but in obedience, as governments quietly dissolve, borders lose meaning, and crime fades, not because people have changed, but because defiance has become irrational. And the darkest realization of all is that Superman never actually becomes evil, because he never needs to, since his version of good is simply too powerful to argue against, and morality itself bends under the weight of absolute strength. What makes this story unsettling and strangely fascinating is how logical it feels, because every step Superman takes makes sense from his perspective, and every action can be justified with statistics, projections, and lives saved. Yet, the emotional cost is impossible to calculate, as humanity slowly realizes that it no longer shapes its own destiny, but lives inside someone else's idea of a perfect world, one where mistakes are prevented rather than learned from, and growth is replaced with stability. The humor in this dark tale comes from the absurdity of the situation, because the idea of Superman trying to micromanage an entire planet highlights how ridiculous godhood becomes when applied to everyday problems. As if the most powerful being in existence now has to decide traffic patterns, economic models, and cultural disputes, revealing that absolute power does not simplify existence but drowns it in infinite responsibility. And the irony is that the more Superman fixes, the less human the world feels. This is why this Superman story is darker than you ever imagined, not because it shows him as a monster, but because it shows him as a solution. The kind that works too well, the kind that removes pain along with choice, danger along with meaning, and chaos along with creativity, leaving behind a world that is safe, stable, and deeply uncomfortable. a world that survives but no longer truly lives. By the end of this story, the most haunting question remains unanswered, because no one can say whether Superman was wrong, whether the suffering he prevented outweighs the freedom he erased, or whether humanity would have eventually destroyed itself without him. And that uncertainty is what lingers long after the final scene, making this tale not just dark but disturbingly plausible, a reminder that even the brightest symbol can cast the longest shadow. If this story made you see Superman in a completely new way, if it challenged your idea of heroes, power, and responsibility, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the darkest and most fascinating comic stories ever told. Leave a comment sharing what you think Superman should have done differently, and share this video with other fans who believe they know everything about the Man of Steel, because this is one story no DC fan should experience alone.